Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. So today I'm looking at the 2026 US Senate elections, and in particular I want to talk about the state of Maine, because Maine just had a very important update in the US Senate race. You may have heard it before this video comes out, but still I wanted to address it because it is very significant news for the 2026 US Senate elections. So what I've done here is I've taken the 2026 Senate map and I've assigned the rankings for both the states that I view as safe and likely for the respective states right now. So for instance, look at the map. The Democrats are favored in about 44 Senate seats. Republicans are favored in about 46, or I'm sorry, in about 46. Now what I did was I took all the seats that are currently forecasted at 5% or under and put them in the toss-up category. So you'll see, for instance, a state like Nebraska or New Hampshire. New Hampshire is more on the lean Democratic side. Nebraska is more on the lean Republican side. Just for the sake of this video and showing what is really competitive, I put it in toss-up for now. I'm sure there's also going to be some pushback on this, as Democrats are going to say they can win Montana, Kansas, Mississippi, Florida, or South Carolina. Republicans may say, well, we can be competitive in Minnesota. Right now, I think they're both kind of outside that 5% or under range right now. It's possible things can change, but right now, I don't think any of those states that I currently have as likely red or likely blue are going to be flipping in November 2026, as of right now. Now, that being said, Democrats have about 7 seats they realistically have to win to flip the Senate, needing 51 Senate seats, with the Republicans having the tiebreaker with the vice president. On this current map, Republicans hold 46. They only need to win 4 out of the 10 Senate seats. But the state of Maine is very important and just got very significant news. So the Maine Senate race, if you've been keeping an eye on it, you'll know that Republican incumbent Susan Collins is up for this election in 2026. Now we can look at her last Senate race, which was in 2020, where Susan Collins defeated then Democrat candidate Sarah Gideon on the first round of voting, the first ballot. Now, Maine uses the ranked choice voting system for its elections. What that essentially means is, actually, you know what, instead of just telling you, I'll show you exactly how it works by using the House race as an example. So in the state of Maine, Maine's 2nd District, Jared Golden, the U.S. Representative, won by 0.55% after ranked choice voting was used. So when everything was said and done, the results on the first round of voting showed that Golden got roughly about 49%, and Austin Thurl, the Republican, got around 49% as well. Now, there are a few candidates in the race as well, including an independent write-in candidate. So when no candidate broke 50% of the vote, it went to ranked choice voting, and then Jared Golden won over Austin Thurl by roughly about under 1 point. So it's a little bit of an oversimplification, but that's essentially how it works. In 2020, that ultimately was not needed, as Susan Collins got 50.98% of the vote. Democrat Sarah Gideon got 42.39%. Now, ultimately, this was pretty much of a shock on election night that this ended up happening. Most of the rankings either had this race listed as toss-up or a narrow favor flip for the Democrat, Sarah Gideon. No one had it predicted as Susan Collins as the favorite in this race. The polling data in this race as well also showed where things stood heading into Election Day, with 270 to wins average having Sarah Gideon at 3.8% lead. Real Clear Politics had Gideon at 6.5% lead. And look at these numbers. 48.5 for Gideon, 42 for Collins, 46.4 for Gideon, 42.6 for Collins, with still roughly about 9.5 to 11% based on these averages of other or undecided vote, including the final poll, which from Emerson College on October 29th through 31st, showed Gideon leading over Collins in the first round by about 2 points, and then in ranked choice voting, leading by about 4. In the Change Research poll, showing something similar, a 4-point lead for Gideon on the first round, and then an 8-point lead for Collins on after ranked choice voting. But then ultimately, obviously, that did not end up happening. Susan Collins ended up getting 50.98%, Sarah Gideon got 42.39%. So what was seen as a shock in 2020, that's how it ultimately ended up going. Now, this Senate race is top of the line for Democrats in 2026. They view Susan Collins as vulnerable. You could essentially try and say she's akin to the Senate elections that took place for the Democrats in 2024, like Montana Senator Jon Tester, who lost re-election to Republican Senator Tim Sheehy. He was the Democratic incumbent, longtime Democratic incumbent, but he lost in this race by 7.1%. Now, you may say Montana is more of a red state than it is a blue state, and you're looking at the presidential map. Montana voted for Trump by 19.9%, but Maine voted for Kamala Harris by about 7%. So if you don't like that analogy of Montana, a better one may potentially be the state of Ohio, where Democratic incumbent Sherrod Brown lost to Republican Senator, or now Republican Senator, Republican challenger, Bernie Moreno, by 3.6%. Now again, Ohio did vote for Donald Trump pretty strongly in 2024 by roughly about 11.2%, so about 4 points more red than Maine was blue. But Ohio on the 2024 Senate map was probably the most similar circumstance to that one, as Pennsylvania was a pure battleground state and Maine's not really in that category. So what does this all mean for 2026? Well, obviously the first thing you have to address for 2026 is the way things are currently looking. And we can look at the polling here for the generic ballot. The Democrats right now are off to an early lead in the generic ballot, where they're currently leading 46.4 to 41.1, roughly about a 5.3% lead as of today. And when you look at the other polling, we can look, say, at President Trump's current approval rating. President Trump is currently disapproved of by a lot of Americans right now, by a majority of Americans, and not just by a little bit. Trump is at 40.1%, disapproval is at 56.5%. So overall, roughly negative 16 points across the United States. Now, obviously, there's still a good amount of voters that will vote for President Trump no matter what. In the Republican base, Trump's approved of 80 to 17.6. So a lot of Republicans will still turn out to vote for Susan Collins that are very strong pro-Republican candidates. But Maine, and a big reason Susan Collins won last time, was the independent voters in Maine. Now, the independent voters for the Donald Trump average show Trump approved of at 27.8 to 64.8. That's going to be Susan Collins' problem. Is in 2020, which is the last time the election took place, 2020, despite Joe Biden becoming the president of the United States, was likely still more of a Republican year than what 2026 is going to end up being, given it is a midterm in Trump's second term. Maine voted for Joe Biden at 9.1% at the top of the ticket, the presidential level, and Susan Collins was still able to win. But for 2026, things could be a lot tougher. Now, the Democratic primary side, this is where the big major news of this video comes from, was looking like it was going to be very competitive. There were two notable candidates in this race. Graham Platner, who obviously you're probably familiar with as the Sullivan Harbor Master, and is a Democrat candidate that's certainly seen as a more farther left progressive candidate, but someone that's really caught fire nationally and in the state of Maine and is becoming quickly very well known. Now, Graham Platner certainly does have his share of controversies, and if you want to read more about that, the Wikipedia article here covers the controversy section very strongly here, and it concerns some Democrats how he would do in a general election against Susan Collins. And for those candidates, or for those people who are very concerned about that, the Democrat governor of the state of Maine, Janet Mills, was another candidate that was in the race as someone that could be that potential alternative to Platner. And Janet Mills did start out early on as the favorite in this race. It's not a ton of people knew who Platner was, but still, Platner started out with very strong support. But even most of the odds would tell you Janet Mills started out as a narrow favorite. But as time went on, it very quickly became clear that Graham Platner had a lead in this race, and he was not going to lose it. By the time Mills drops out of the race, which was on April 30th, we saw Platner leading by over 25 points in the Democratic primary, already breaking 50% of the vote in the polling averages, with still roughly about 13% undecided. Now, Janet Mills was getting 30.5%, but as a political newcomer in Graham Platner and the incumbent governor of the state of Maine, there was just no pathway for Janet Mills to win this. So Janet Mills, on April 30th, drops out of the race and is the major news for this race. And now it comes to what everyone's going to be asking about. Well, what about the general election? What happens now? Well, first things first, we're going to use the Decision Desk HQ polling average of Platner versus Susan Collins. And it's already very interesting to see how much support Graham Platner currently has in this race. Where early on, we could say, look to back December, Collins and Platner were essentially tied at 45-45. Right around the beginning of February, Collins had a lead, 45.1, 44.8, a very close race. Then some polling right around February 17th shows Graham Platner takes the lead by roughly about 2.7%. As of today, following the Janet Mills news, which she dropped out on, I believe it was April 30th, so there hasn't been any polling data factored into it yet by the time that she dropped out, but Platner now leads over Collins 48.6 to 42.3. A very sizable lead for a Democratic challenger over a Republican incumbent. Now, it is in the state of Maine, which is more of a Democratic state, again, at the national level for president and usually for Senate and governor as well, but Susan Collins in 2020 was able to defy the odds and win this race. Now, this time around in 2026, though, if Susan Collins is going to win, it's looking like she's going to have to do the same thing again. But Graham Platner seems to be off to a stronger start than Sarah Gideon did. Where, again, I showed you the final polling average here, which, again, that Real Clear Politics one had Sarah Gideon at 48.5. This is in September of 2020. Susan Collins at 42.6. We're now in May of 2026, and Graham Platner's at a pretty similar standing, right around the low 40% or so to even the, or 48%, 47%, 48%. He's now at 48.2 in the average of the averages. Susan Collins is at 41.4. So her support is even lower at this current point in time than it was in the 2020 poll, with Platner at 48.2. The difference is, and this is where it gets interesting, of the can Susan Collins still win this race, even though she mathematically can, there's still 10.4% of voters that are saying other or undecided as of right now. So there is the potential, if something similar to 2020 happens, where enough people say they don't want to vote for Graham Platner, Susan Collins could pull this race out. But 2026, from everything we've heard thus far, seems to be much more of a Democratic-friendly election environment than 2020 was. Even though Democrats did very well in 2020, 2026 is shaping up to be more like a 2018 Democratic midterm year where everything essentially went great for the Democrats. And just to show you what happened on that map, 2018, Maine's fellow independent Senator Angus King, who caucuses with the Democrats, won by 19.1%. So it's certainly possible that the incumbent Senator Susan Collins could win this race. The math is technically there. If she can win those undecided voters over, she'll probably need ranked choice voting to do so. The math is possible, but Graham Platner has a very strong lead in this race, a very early lead, and the only way Susan Collins is going to win this race is things have to start changing very quickly in this race in reverse course, because right now it looks like Graham Platner is a very strong lead and is kind of coasting to the election right now. Now, the Democrats are going to tell you definitely that they can't allow that to be the case for the Democrats to coast, as that's essentially what happened to them last time. But at this current point in time, it seems like Graham Platner is off to an early lead against Susan Collins, and a stronger one than Sarah Gideon ever had during 2020. So it's really interesting. When you look at the Senate map for 2026, no surprise here, the polling would indicate Maine Senate race is going to be roughly around a likely Democratic lead, which would be 5 to 15 points based on this. In my own predictions right now, despite the lead, I would still put it as lean Democrat, as Susan Collins is not vocally very popular, but she still got 51% of the vote in 2020, which to me says there could still be a lot of voters in Maine that are ultimately going to end up voting for Susan Collins, but either aren't saying it in polls or are very quiet about it or just aren't representing it super well. So I do think Graham Platner is currently favored to win this race. I don't think 7 points is ultimately what's going to happen, though. I think Graham Platner wins, but I think he wins under 5 points as of today. But it's still very significant, as Maine is one of two states held by Republicans in North Carolina and Maine are held by Republican incumbents heading into this election that were seen as the main battleground states that Republicans really can't afford to lose. Democrats are now favored in Maine and in North Carolina and are now expanding the map to having chances at flipping Ohio, Iowa, Nebraska, Texas, Alaska, on top of holding Democratic-held seats in Michigan and Georgia. So this Maine Senate race, now that it's Graham Platner versus Susan Collins, is officially on. That's going to be the matchup for 2026, one that's going to be very interesting to watch. The Democrat certainly has the advantage right now, but all bets are off, and it's going to be very interesting to see how it goes through November. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you did, leave a comment below telling me your thoughts on this video and on this news, and I hope to see you in a future video.